The Snowball, Warren Buffett and the Business of Life by Alice Schroeder. Picture this. It's July 1999, and you're high up in the mountains of Sun Valley, Idaho, surrounded by the world's elite at an ultra-exclusive conference. Bill Gates is here, Steve Jobs, Rupert Murdoch, Tom Brokaw. Everyone's speaking in this strange new dialect, tossing around words like eyeballs, B2B, and new paradigm, like they're magic spells that can turn sand into gold. The dot-com frenzy is at its absolute peak, and people are making fortunes from companies that have literally never turned a profit. Stock prices are rocketing into the stratosphere. Then this guy shuffles up to the podium wearing a simple red Nebraska sweater. He's pushing 70, with messy white hair and those thick, old-school glasses. To the young tech hotshots in the audience, he might as well be their grandfather. His name? Warren Buffett. And for months, the financial media has been having a field day at his expense, calling him washed up, a dinosaur who completely missed the boat on the technology revolution. His company's stock has been dead in the water, while internet stocks have been shooting to the moon. Everyone's expecting him to make excuses, maybe show a hint of bitterness. Instead, he starts talking, and for the next hour, he calmly dismantles the entire dot-com fever dream piece by piece. But here's what's brilliant. He doesn't even talk about the internet. Instead, he walks them through the history of automobiles and airplanes, showing how even the most revolutionary inventions usually end up destroying investor wealth rather than creating it. Then he delivers this gem of a line, telling this room packed with people riding the bubble to riches that they're like oil prospectors who heard there might be oil in hell and decided to rush down there to start drilling. When he finishes, there's this awkward moment of dead silence before the polite applause starts. You can hear people whispering, convinced the old man has lost his edge. He just doesn't get it anymore. He missed the boat. Fast forward 1 year, the dot-com bubble explodes, vaporizing trillions of dollars and proving him spectacularly, almost eerily right. That single moment captures everything about Warren Buffett. Here's a guy with the discipline to stand alone, the courage to think independently, and what he calls an inner scorecard. This is the story of someone who built one of history's greatest fortunes, not by running with the herd, but by trusting his own internal compass, even when everyone thought he was crazy. Today, we're diving into the official biography of this fascinating character, The Snowball, Warren Buffett and the Business of Life by Alice Schroeder. Fair warning, this isn't some dry investment manual. It's the story of an entire life, a philosophy for living, and a set of principles that can guide you no matter what you're trying to accomplish. By the time we're done, you'll understand the brilliant idea behind that title, that life is like a snowball rolling down a hill. You just need to find wet snow and a really long slope. You'll learn how to build your own snowball of success, knowledge, and relationships, one smart decision at a time. To really get Warren Buffett, you've got to go back to where it all started, Omaha, Nebraska, in the Great Depression. He was born in 1930, just 10 months after the legendary 1929 stock market crash. His father, Howard Buffett, was a stockbroker who went through a period where he literally couldn't sell anything. The family actually worried about having enough food. This early brush with financial terror left a permanent scar on young Warren. From day one, money wasn't about fancy cars or mansions. It was about freedom. It was about building a fortress so solid that nobody could ever push him around. He developed what he'd later call an inner scorecard. He framed it with this question: would you rather be the world's greatest lover, but have everyone think you're terrible in bed, or be the world's worst lover, but have everyone convinced you're amazing? For Warren, the answer was obvious. What actually mattered was your own internal measure of success, not the world's applause or criticism. This philosophy came straight from his father. Howard Buffett was this unshakable pillar of principle. As a Republican congressman, he'd regularly vote against his own party if he thought they were wrong, even if it meant being one of only 3 votes against 412. He simply didn't care what others thought. As Warren put it, his dad was 100% inner scorecard guy. His mother, Layla, was a completely different story. To the outside world, she appeared to be this perfect, energetic, sweet mother and wife. Behind closed doors, though, she had these explosive episodes. For an hour, sometimes 2, she'd unleash these verbal attacks on Warren and his older sister Doris, telling them they were worthless and ungrateful. She wouldn't stop until she'd reduced them to tears. Warren learned to cope by basically avoiding home as much as possible, finding comfort in solitary activities. These brutal experiences planted a deep fear of confrontation in him, and created this intense need to be liked, but they also pushed him further into his own mind, into the world of numbers where everything made logical, predictable sense. And boy, was he obsessed with numbers. He'd sit there for hours calculating how long hymn composers had lived based on the dates in church hymnals. He'd collect bottle caps from soda machines all over town, not because he wanted the caps, but so he could count them and figure out which soda was winning. For Warren, gathering information was this thrilling treasure hunt. The world was full of valuable clues just lying around that nobody else seemed to notice. This number obsession quickly evolved into a money obsession. At the ripe old age of 6, he launched his first business venture, buying 6 packs of Coca-Cola from his grandfather's grocery store and selling individual bottles door to door for a nickel profit per pack. He sold chewing gum too, but with one ironclad rule: he'd never break up a pack. Even as a kid, he later remembered, "I've got my principles." He understood risk and reward instinctively. Selling one stick wasn't worth getting stuck with 4 others nobody might want. His world cracked wide open when he was about 10. His father took him to New York City. Warren had exactly 3 places on his must-see list: the Lionel Train Company, this famous stamp and coin dealer, and the New York Stock Exchange. At the exchange, they had lunch with a member, and after the meal, this guy came over with a tray of tobacco leaves and actually rolled a custom cigar right there at the table for their host. For young Warren, this was like being struck by lightning. He had 0 interest in smoking, but he instantly understood the economics. For someone to afford to have a personal cigar roller meant that this place, the stock exchange, had to be an absolute fountain of wealth. Right then, a vision took root in his mind. He wanted into that world, not for the cigars, but for the independence that kind of wealth represented. Back in Omaha, he discovered a book in the library that would literally change his life: 1,000 Ways to Make $1,000. The book was packed with practical business ideas, but one concept absolutely electrified him: compound interest. He could see how a modest sum of money, growing at a steady rate, could explode into a fortune over time. He pictured it like a snowball. You start with this tiny ball of snow at the top of a hill. As you roll it down, it picks up more snow, getting bigger and bigger, faster and faster. This was the secret. He announced to his friend Stu Erickson that he'd be a millionaire by 35. In the 1940s, this sounded like pure childhood fantasy. But Warren wasn't fantasizing. He was calculating. He had 25 years to grow his snowball. His first real investment taught him lessons he'd carry forever. Using his life savings of about $120, he and his sister Doris bought 3 shares each of something called City Service. the stock immediately tanked. Doris, he remembered, reminded him every single day on the walk to school that her stock was dropping. He felt this crushing weight of responsibility. When the stock finally crawled back up, he sold it for a tiny $5 profit total for both of them. Almost immediately, the stock exploded upward to over $200 a share. He learned 3 lessons burned into his brain forever. 1. Don't obsess over the price you paid for something. 2. Don't jump at a small profit too quickly. And 3. If you're managing other people's money, be ready for them to lose their minds when things go south. He absolutely hated that feeling of letting someone down. It was a feeling he'd spend the rest of his life trying to avoid. After a rebellious, miserable stint in high school when his family moved to Washington for his father's congressional term, and 2 unfulfilling years at the Wharton School of Business, Warren was hunting for his next move. He'd set his sights on Harvard Business School, but after a 10-minute interview they rejected him flat. He was crushed. As he remembered it, I looked about 16, and emotionally was about 9. But that rejection, he'd later say, was the most pivotal moment of his entire life. Scrambling for alternatives, he was flipping through the Columbia University course catalog when he saw 2 names that made his heart skip: Benjamin Graham and David Dodd. To Warren, these guys were legends. He'd recently discovered Graham's book, The Intelligent Investor, and it had hit him like a lightning bolt. For years, he'd been devouring every stock market book he could find, most of them filled with charts and patterns that felt like pure voodoo. Graham's book was different. It laid out a logical, rational framework for investing. Graham taught 3 fundamental principles that would become the foundation of Buffett's entire approach. First, a stock isn't just some ticker symbol flickering on a screen. It's a piece of ownership in an actual business. You should analyze it that way. Second, you need a margin of safety. Only buy a stock when it's trading for significantly less than what you calculate the underlying business is truly worth. This doesn't just protect you from screwing up your analysis. It also gives you massive upside when the market eventually recognizes the real value. And third, you need to understand the concept of Mr. Market. Graham imagined the market as this moody business partner who shows up every day offering to either buy your shares or sell you his. Some days he's euphoric and quotes you a ridiculously high price. Other days he's depressed and offers an absurdly low price. You're completely free to ignore him. But his mood swings are there to be exploited, not to control you. You're not his servant. He's yours. Discovering that Ben Graham was actually teaching at Columbia was like a young physics student finding out that Einstein was giving lectures at the community college down the street. Warren immediately fired off a letter to the dean, David Dodd, explaining that he'd just realized they were teaching there and he absolutely had to attend. Even though it was way past the application deadline, Dodd, who'd co-written Graham's masterwork Security Analysis, let him in. At Columbia, Warren was in absolute heaven. He absorbed everything Graham taught like a sponge. He became the only student to ever earn an A+ in Graham's class. After graduation, he asked Graham for a job. Graham turned him down. Graham's firm, a small Jewish-run partnership, made a point of only hiring Jewish employees at a time when much of Wall Street openly discriminated against them. So Warren returned to Omaha and started working as a stockbroker at his father's firm, but he hated every minute of it. He felt like he was just pushing stocks on people who had no idea what they were buying. The whole system pitted his interests against his clients, because he made money when they traded, not necessarily when they profited. Finally, 2 years later, Graham changed his mind and hired him. Warren moved back to New York with his new wife, Susan Thompson. Susie, the vibrant and emotionally intelligent daughter of one of his father's friends, was his opposite in almost every way. Where Warren was analytical and emotionally guarded, Susie was intuitive and deeply connected to people's feelings. She was, as Warren would say, the sprinkling can who was going to make sure that the flowers grew. She saw the deep insecurity beneath his confident surface and made it her mission to put him together. Working at Graham Newman, Buffett was absolutely on fire. He hunted for what Graham called cigar butts, beaten down, unloved stocks, trading so cheaply they had one last, free puff of profit left in them. He learned the art of arbitrage, profiting from tiny price discrepancies in related securities. But after a couple of years, Ben Graham, who had little interest in piling up a huge fortune, decided to retire. Buffett, now 26, with a personal net worth of about $174,000, decided to retire too. He moved back to Omaha with a plan. He'd start his own investment partnership, modeled after Graham's. On May 1, 1956, he gathered 7 partners, mostly family and close friends, including his Aunt Alice and his sister Doris, who collectively invested $105,000. Warren himself put in only $100. His rules were simple and absolutely non-negotiable. He would tell his partners nothing about what he was investing in. They could only add or withdraw money once a year. He'd take a quarter of the profits above a 4% annual return, but he'd also personally cover a quarter of any losses. He was putting his own skin in the game. He wanted partners who trusted him completely, not clients who questioned every move. And so, from a tiny sun porch in his rented house on Underwood Avenue, the snowball really started rolling. He spent his days devouring financial documents page by page, hunting for those cigar butts. The 1950s market was absolutely stuffed with them. He found companies trading for less than the actual cash sitting in their bank accounts. Then, in 1959, he had a lunch meeting that would change everything. A friend from Omaha introduced him to a Los Angeles lawyer named Charles T. Munger. Munger was 6 years older, brilliant, opinionated, and just as fascinated with business as Warren was. They talked for hours, basically ignoring everyone else at the table. It was the beginning of a conversation that would continue, uninterrupted, for decades. Charlie Munger would become the person who pushed Buffett's thinking beyond Ben Graham's cigar butt philosophy. Munger argued that it was far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a mediocre company at a wonderful price. He pushed Warren to look beyond just balance sheets at the actual quality of a business, its brand power, its competitive position, its management team. What gave a company a lasting advantage? What Munger called a moat. This shift in philosophy happened gradually, but it was profound. It moved Buffett away from simply buying cheap stocks toward buying exceptional businesses to hold for the long haul. One of the first major tests of this new thinking came with American Express. In 1963, the company got hammered by a massive scandal. A subsidiary had issued warehouse receipts for millions of gallons of salad oil that didn't actually exist. The company was facing enormous losses, and Wall Street panicked, convinced the scandal would destroy the company's reputation forever. The stock plummeted. Buffett, however, did his own research. He went to restaurants and banks, casually asking people if they'd stopped using American Express travelers' checks or credit cards. They hadn't. The scandal hadn't touched the core business, which was the deep trust people had in the brand. He realized the underlying business was still wonderful, now selling at a fair, or even cheap, price. He invested 40% of his partnership's entire assets into the stock. Within a few years, the investment had multiplied several times over. His greatest vehicle, however, came from what he'd call his biggest mistake. In 1962, he started buying stock in a dying New England textile mill called Berkshire Hathaway. It was a classic cigar butt play, trading for way less than its assets were worth. He bought the stock planning to sell it back to management for a small profit. But when the CEO, C. Barry Stanton, tried to nickel and dime him by 1/8 of a point, Buffett got angry. Instead of selling, he started buying more. He bought until he controlled the company, and in 1965, he fired Stanton. Now he owned a terrible business. The textile industry was dying, and no amount of effort could save it. He later admitted, "So I bought my own cigar butt, and I tried to smoke it. All you had was a soggy cigar butt in your mouth. That was Berkshire Hathaway." But Berkshire had one crucial asset: cash flow. Instead of pouring that cash into the failing textile operation, Buffett started using it to buy other, better businesses. In 1967, he bought an Omaha insurance company called National Indemnity, and with that purchase, he discovered the magic of float. Insurance companies collect premiums from customers up front and only pay claims later. Meanwhile, they get to invest that money, the float, for their own benefit. It was like having this enormous, interest-free loan that kept growing. Buffett realized that if he could run the insurance business at break-even or better, he was essentially getting paid to invest other people's money. This became the engine that would power Berkshire's incredible growth. He used the float from National Indemnity and other insurers he acquired to buy See's Candies, a fantastic business with powerful brand loyalty that could raise prices every year without losing customers. He bought the Buffalo News, a newspaper that, after a brutal competitive battle, became a local monopoly, what he called an unregulated toll bridge. He was transforming Berkshire Hathaway from a dying textile mill into this diversified holding company for his best investments. The 1973-74 market crash was like Christmas morning for him. While everyone else was panicking, Buffett was, in his own words, like an oversexed man in a harem. Stocks were dirt cheap, and he had cash to deploy. This was when he bought a huge stake in the Washington Post Company, run by his new friend, Katharine Graham. The newspaper was a phenomenal business, essentially a monopoly in a major city, and its stock was absurdly cheap. The relationship with K. Graham opened up an entirely new world for Buffett. Here was this guy from Omaha who ate hamburgers and drank Pepsi, suddenly a regular at her glamorous Georgetown dinner parties, sitting next to presidents and celebrities. She introduced him to a world of power and influence that extended far beyond business, and he, in turn, became her most trusted business advisor, her teacher, her rock during crises like the Watergate scandal and a violent pressman strike. By the mid-'80s, Buffett was a billionaire, but his life was about to enter its most public and challenging phase. In 1987, he invested $700 million in the investment bank Salomon Brothers to save it from a hostile takeover. He placed his trust in its CEO, John Gutfreund. It was a serious mistake. In 1991, a massive scandal erupted when a rogue trader at Salomon got caught rigging U.S. Treasury bond auctions. Even worse, it came out that Gutfreund and other top executives had known about the illegal activity for months and had done absolutely nothing. The firm was teetering on the edge of collapse. The U.S. Treasury was threatening to ban Salomon from doing business with the government, which would have been a death sentence. During a desperate weekend of negotiations, Buffett was asked to step in as interim chairman to save the firm. He really didn't want to do it. It meant relocating to New York, dealing with a culture he couldn't stand, and putting his own reputation on the line for a mess he didn't create. But his own money, and more importantly his reputation, were tied to Salomon. He had no choice. He flew to New York and faced a hostile press, angry regulators, and a terrified workforce. His message was simple and direct. Lose money for the firm, and I will be understanding. Lose a shred of reputation for the firm, and I will be ruthless. He spent 9 grueling months cleaning up the Solomon mess, a period he described as anything but enjoyable. But ultimately, he saved the firm, restored its reputation, and walked away having cemented his status not just as a brilliant investor, but as someone who could step in and fix seemingly impossible corporate disasters. Through all of this, his personal life was undergoing its own quiet transformation. His wife, Susie, the absolute center of his emotional universe, had left Omaha in 1977 to pursue her own life and a singing career in San Francisco. It wasn't a divorce. Their connection remained incredibly deep. They talked on the phone almost daily. But Warren was absolutely devastated. He was, in his own words, a wreck. Susie, knowing he couldn't function alone, had arranged for a friend, Astrid Menks, to check in on him and cook him meals. Over time, Astrid moved in and became his companion in Omaha, while Susie remained his wife and closest confidant from California. It was an unconventional arrangement that, as Warren put it, suited all of us quite well. The story of Warren Buffett is really the story of compounding. Not just the compounding of money, but the compounding of knowledge, relationships, and reputation. He built his fortune by making one smart, rational decision after another, year after year, letting that snowball roll. He surrounded himself with people he trusted and admired, like Charlie Munger, who pushed him to become better, and he built a reputation for integrity that became his most valuable asset, the moat, around his own personal fortress. But as Alice Schroeder reveals in The Snowball, his life is also a profoundly human story. It's about overcoming personal insecurities, navigating the complex dynamics of family, love, and ambition, and about a man who, despite accumulating immense wealth, never lost sight of the simple core principles he learned as a boy in Omaha. When you finish a book like The Snowball, you walk away with so much more than just dates and events from a famous life. You're left with this feeling, these powerful ideas that keep echoing in your head long after you've turned the last page. For me, the most powerful lesson from Warren Buffett's life has nothing to do with picking stocks. It's about the profound importance of that inner scorecard he talks about. We live in a world that's constantly screaming for our attention, telling us what to value, what to chase, who to become. Having a strong internal compass in all that noise is everything. Buffett's ability to stand in that Sun Valley room in 1999 and calmly say, "I think you're all wrong," wasn't arrogance or stubbornness. It was the ultimate expression of his inner scorecard. He'd done his homework, his reasoning was solid, and what the crowd thought was just noise. He was playing his own game. How often do we catch ourselves playing someone else's game? Chasing a career because it looks impressive on LinkedIn, or measuring our success by followers and likes instead of by our own sense of fulfillment. Buffett's life is powerful proof of what happens when you define success on your own terms, and then have the discipline to stick to it, even when everyone thinks you're crazy. The second huge idea is, of course, the snowball itself. It's such a simple, elegant metaphor for life. The results of our actions compound over time. Those little habits, the small bits of knowledge we pick up each day, the relationships we nurture, they all add up. Buffett started his snowball incredibly early, and he never stopped rolling it. He never thought he was too old to learn or too smart to ask questions. He says he spends most of his day just reading and thinking. He's compounding his knowledge, which then compounds his wealth. It's such an encouraging message, especially when you're young. Those small, smart choices you make today, reading a book, instead of scrolling endlessly, saving a bit of money instead of spending it all, being genuinely kind to someone. They might not seem significant right now, but over a lifetime they build this momentum that becomes unstoppable. You're building your own wet snow. Finally, there's this idea of the ovarian lottery. Buffett is acutely aware that so much of his success came from pure luck, being born in the right country, at the right time, to the right parents. This isn't false modesty or some PR move. It's a genuine sense of gratitude and responsibility. It's the driving force behind his decision to give away almost all of his massive fortune. He sees his wealth not just as his own, but as claim checks on society's resources. And he believes those claim checks should ultimately go back to society to help people who weren't as fortunate in the lottery of birth. It's a powerful lens through which to view our own lives. We all have advantages we didn't earn. What's our responsibility to others? So, what can you actually do with all this? Let me leave you with a couple of simple actions inspired by Buffett's life. First, take a moment today to think about your inner scorecard. Actually write down what success truly means to you, separate from anyone else's expectations or opinions. What kind of person do you want to be? That's your compass. Check it regularly. Second, start your snowball. Just 1% better each day. Read for 10 minutes. Save $10. Make one genuine connection. It doesn't have to be some grand gesture. Just find a little bit of wet snow and start rolling. The hill is long, and time is on your side. That was a summary of The Snowball by Alice Schroeder. We've journeyed through the highlights of an incredible life today. But a summary is like looking at a map of a great city. The real adventure happens when you actually walk those streets yourself. The book is packed with stories, details, and emotional depth that we just couldn't cover in one sitting. If you found yourself intrigued by the man who built a billion-dollar empire on simple principles and cherry Coke, I genuinely encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just learning about Warren Buffett. It's an experience that will make you think deeply about your own life, your own scorecard, and the snowball you're building. There's a link to the book in the description below. And if this summary brought you any value, please do me a small favor and hit that subscribe button. It helps us continue bringing these life-changing books from the billionaire's bookshelf to you. Let's keep learning and growing together.